Welcome, everybody, to the NFL Show on the Gruely Crew Sports Network. I'm your host for the NFL Show, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, Sam Teets. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me on today.
Oh, you're supposed to sound more excited. Anthony may be joining us in a little bit, but we shall see. All right, so today we're going to go a little different track instead of just talking about, NFL news, because there's not a whole lot. And, speculation has been rampant about what the future holds for Tom Brady as a member of the New England Patriots. No crystal ball can predict exactly what will happen to Manning, but the past can show us other quarterbacks who have found success after changing teams late in their careers. For every Johnny Unitas that struggled in a different uniform, there's a guy like Joe Montana or Kurt Warner who made it work. Today, we're going to look at both. We're going to look at guys who made it work, guys that it didn't work for. And Sam, I think from your studies, does this something that you think works more often than not or fails?
I think it fails more often than it works. There are a few cases, and you brought up two already, where it works, but I've noticed this as a general trend across different sports as well. When you change a team late in your career and you've been in the same team, but you go to the same team for your entire career, and you switch late, usually it doesn't work out. Usually there's a dramatic drop-off, I feel like. So I don't believe for Brady, in Brady's case, or in the case of history, switching teams late in your career really works out.
I think Brady's case is different than what we've seen. And I think what I mean by that is Brady's case, to me, if you want to look at something very similar, I think would be a guy like Brett Favre, who the Packers, I think, wanted to move on from him and get Aaron Rodgers in there. And I think with Tom Brady, kind of wants to move on. I think Favre kind of maybe wanted to move on just because of the Aaron Rodgers talk. So I think that kind of separates him from most of these guys, which most of these guys were at the end of their career and were ready to be replaced.
Yeah, a lot of these guys I'm looking at were really starting to tail off towards the end of their careers, and they kind of knew it was time to move on. The organizations were willing to do it, and they were finding replacements. But yeah, in the case of Tom Brady is the guy who can choose what he wants to do almost. Tom Brady has more agency in this than normally other guys would. So with Brady, it's a unique situation, even more so than the Favre case. Because Favre, there was obviously a little bit of drop off already, and he hadn't won a title in forever. For Tom Brady, we're talking about a guy who's 2 years removed from a last Super Bowl victory. So It's a little bit different in that case.
Yeah, really a year removed. It was just last year at this time we were talking about how he'd won another Super Bowl and if he could win another one. I think when I look through history and I look at these guys, let's start off with Drew Bledsoe, because Drew Bledsoe's a guy that was kind of forced out, similar to, Kurt Warner and what happened with him. And Drew Bledsoe was a guy who, after being traded to Buffalo, threw for 4,300 yards in his first season, kind of dropped off after that. So I think really what we see most of the time is the majority of these guys over the last 20 years have had at least one or two more good years with those other teams before they've fallen off.
Yeah, you get a little bit of a last gasp from these kind of guys. People forget with Drew Bledsoe, there was really a debate in New England, especially amongst the fans, over whose side were you on. A lot of people loved Drew Bledsoe from that fandom. They really wanted Bledsoe to stay, some of the people, which obviously wouldn't have been the right decision. But there was really an argument over Bledsoe or Brady at the time. So him switching teams, he wasn't washed up necessarily, but Tom Brady presented more upside in that case.
Yeah, and I think what people forget is that even in that Super Bowl 36, a lot of people thought Bledsoe should start because if you remember, you're a Steelers fan. I don't know. You're probably not old enough to remember that long ago since you're 12. But if you remember, Tom Brady got hurt in that game. Drew Bledsoe came in and won them that AFC Championship game with a huge touchdown pass. And there was a lot of people that really were questioning who should start Super Bowl 36.
When you want more of a modern comparison almost, think about when Colin Kaepernick replaced Alex Smith late in the season for the 49ers a little bit. And there was talk about well, when Alex Smith got healthy again, would they play Alex Smith or would they stick with Colin Kaepernick? And I stuck with the hot hand in that case. And I did the same here with the Patriots. But it's kind of a raw deal if you're someone like Drew Bledsoe, who had success early in his career. He made a couple of Pro Bowls. He led the league in passing yards in only his second season in the NFL. So it really works out in the short end for him, but he got to be part of the Super Bowl victory there and got to play a role in the playoffs. I think that probably maybe comforted him a little bit and then ultimately losing his job.
Now, if we want to go a success story, we're going to go to Wayback Machine. So you want to get ready here. And that's probably why Anthony didn't come on. But let's go Norm Van Brocklin. And Norm Van Brocklin was the original greatest show on turf in L.A. with the Rams. He split time with quarterback Bob Waterfield through most of the first 8 to 10 years of his career. Still won an NFL championship, 6 Pro Bowl appearances. And at the age of 32, he got traded to the Eagles before the 58 season. And the Eagles went 2-9-1 in his first season under center, but they quickly turned things around, and they ended up beating the Green Bay Packers, the only time the Packers lost an NFL championship game in 1960. So Van Brocklin's a guy where it worked. They traded him at the age of 32. But the other thing that stands out here is after 1960, Van Brocklin kind of dropped off the face of the earth again, so it's more of a one-and-done thing here.
Biggs, he came in with them in 1958, and then in 1960 they won the title. I think he won the MVP that year of the entire league, I'm pretty sure, looking back at it now.
Yeah.
So he wins the MVP, they win the title, and then he's done. He doesn't play again. It's the ultimate end of his career at that point. So with him, that's an interesting case because he chooses to go out on top, and you look at it, this is a guy who just won the MVP, who just won an NFL championship. Usually you would expect someone like that to play a little longer, but of course it's not modern football. In the modern world, you expect him to play a little bit longer. But it's his age 34 season, and he chooses to go out on top as a champion and as an MVP.
Yeah, and the thing that was interesting about that team is that Rams team was a team that in the 50s was one of the dominant teams in the NFL. They had a great offense. And then because of salary concerns, they started basically selling off and trading and getting rid of all their players, and really dropped off the face of the earth for about a 4 or 5 year time period. And then they hired George Allen, I think in 1960, well, in the late 60s, and came back and were a great team again. So another guy, which is more recent, to me he's more recent, I guess, when you look at this. He was the NFL MVP in 1990, so damn, Sam, that was 30 years ago. But Warren Moon is a guy that stands out to me because Moon played his first 5 years in the CFL where he won 5 straight Grey Cups. He moves to the Oilers in 1984. He had a lot of success, but in 1994, at age 38, Moon was traded to Minnesota and proceeded to throw for over 4,200 yards in 1994 and 1995.
Yeah, this is the case again where we talked about it works for 1 or 2 more years, and then kind of it drops off because in his first 2 years in Minnesota, he made Pro Bowls. He was still playing, getting through for 4,200 yards both times. But then in 1996, he only plays 8 games. He throws for 1,600 yards, and he throws more interceptions than touchdowns. So that was his 3rd season in Minnesota. And ultimately, after that, he goes to Seattle, has another Pro Bowl year, and then he kind of falls off again after that. So with Moon, it's a case where he actually had success with 2 different teams late in his career. And people forget, he was already 38 years old when he gets to Minnesota. He entered the NFL when he was 28 already. So with him, it really is the case that he was up there in age, and he played until he was on a roster until he was age 44. So he played for a long time.
Yeah, and with Warren Moon, you just wonder what kind of records he could have set if somebody in 1978, 79 would have drafted him to the NFL, because the thing that's really bad is I don't even think he was drafted by an NFL team. He took the Washington Huskies and won the Rose Bowl 27-20 over Michigan in 1978, but this was back at a time where African Americans, people didn't really want him to play quarterback. And then he went to Edmonton and won 5 straight Grey Cups. And then in 1984, went to the Oilers, and the rest is kind of history from there, ending in a Hall of Fame career. Now, we can't talk about guys like this unless we talk about the circus that surrounded every move Brett Favre made late in his career. I think he's still trying to start rumors that he may come back. In 2007 or 2008, he spent the season with the New York Jets, and that was the year the team started 8-3. He threw 20 touchdown passes. and then kind of fell apart at the end, and that all ended with him throwing, as he most often did in big games, an interception against the Dolphins in a game where if the Jets win, they make the playoffs. 2009, he goes to Minnesota, gets to the NFC Championship game, having one of his best years, and then, of course, he throws across his body to the middle of the field. The Saints intercept it. The Saints go to the Super Bowl. So Brett Favre is a guy that, I mean, I think you could say he had success elsewhere, but, I mean, he was kind of what he was everywhere else, which was great in the regular season, and then he would have a brain fart, and the season would be over.
Yeah, I mean, with him, really, you have to just focus on that 2009 season with Minnesota. Because for me, the 2008 season with the Jets, he led the league with interceptions of 22. That's really not a season where I'd say he had a lot of success. Getting the Jets to a 9-7 record is pretty, like, that's – if he did that nowadays with the current Jets, that'd be pretty, like, incredible.
Oh, they were 7-9 last year, and they beat the Dallas Cowboys, Anthony.
That's true. They did beat the Dallas Cowboys, so we can always hold that over Anthony's head for the rest of his life. But, you know, I really think you should focus on that 2009 season where they did get deep into the playoffs. Now, that game's often remembered for the Bountygate scandal that resulted afterwards, I believe, where it came out the Saints players were getting paid or they were getting incentivized to target players like Brett Favre.
Oh, that was false. It was proven false. Don't give me that crap. You're supposed to go out and try to hurt somebody when you play football, aren't you?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, ultimately, I don't think it matters in the outcome of the game because, I mean, Brett Favre, like you said, he made a mistake that ultimately cost them the win. They could have won that game. They legitimately could have won that game. But you make a silly decision like that, and Brett Favre was willing to always make silly decisions throughout his entire career, and he did it in a big moment, and ultimately that's kind of what he's remembered for.
All right. Now, here's another one that was a success, and he was a guy that was kind of forced out by an earlier pick, too, and that would be Kurt Warner, and there's got to be a Kurt Warner movie coming up. Actually, I heard there might be, but he was a guy that went undrafted, was cut by the Green Bay Packers, spent time in the AFL and the NFL Europe before finally getting on the roster with the Rams. Of course, you get an injury to Green, the quarterback there, Trent Green, and he wins a Super Bowl. And he had some injury issues, and people kind of thought maybe his career was done. He goes to the New York Giants. They brought him in as a stopgap to Eli Manning. And if I remember right that year, Sam, they were like 5-4 or 5-5 and had a shot at the playoffs. They benched him, brought in Manning, and everybody thought that Kurt Warner was just going to Arizona to close out his career. And then he spent 5 seasons with the Cardinals, including 2008, which he took them all the way to the Super Bowl, damn near won the game, and he threw for at least 3,000 yards 3 times with Arizona and showed that his success with the Rams was no fluke. And I think Kurt Warner has to be one of the greatest success stories moving on late in his career.
But yeah, at any point in his career, honestly, because he had those 3 really great years with the Rams, and he kind of falls off the face of the earth. He's in New York, and everyone thinks he's done. And then he bounces back in Arizona. Now, Arizona had a lot of weapons to help him out there. They had Anquan Bolden, they had Larry Fitzgerald. They had some guys out there to help him. And he went out there and he made the most of every opportunity with Arizona. He got them to the Super Bowl. And really, they just ran into a team in Pittsburgh that had a really good defense. We've talked about this before. And Santonio Holmes made an incredible catch. They ran into a team that just managed to beat them. Only by 4 points, though. It wasn't like they got killed. And really, if you look at it, even his final season where he threw for 3,700 yards, 26 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. It's still a really good year by NFL standards. So, and he was 38 years old at the time. So he changes teams. He gets benched. He's basically a transition quarterback. And he comes back and he returns to playing like an all-pro again by the end of his career. And that's something that we don't get to see for a lot of quarterbacks because sometimes they just change teams. But he actually hit rock bottom and then came back up again.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about probably the 2 biggest misses on these guys, I think it would be Johnny Unitas going to the San Diego Chargers in 1973 and Joe Namath in 1977 going to the Rams. And I think in both those cases, Johnny Unitas' case was, I think he was just too old. He was done, but he didn't want to admit it. And with Joe Namath, it was just years of knee injuries. Basically, we never saw the best Joe Namath even when he was in the NFL because of knee issues that started when he was at Alabama.
Yeah, we never really got, which is kind of disappointing. We never get to see a player like him reach his full potential. But when he went to the Rams, it was just for one final season. He was 34 years old. He played 4 games. They went 2-2. And even before that with the Jets, even after his initial, I want to say, his initial 5 or 6 seasons with the Jets, he started to trail off a little bit as well because injuries kept compounding over his career. And at the time, they don't have the medical equipment and the medical procedures they have now. So for him, it really was just a build-up over time that ground him down. And eventually, you end up with the Rams. You start 4 games, and you just kind of go out on a whimper. And you're right.
Go ahead. You there? Sam? Sam? Did we lose Sam? Huh. Wonder where Sam went. He must have got tired of talking to me. You can all understand that, though. Hold on here. Yeah, and I think with Johnny Unitas, I think that we'd seen slippage of Johnny Unitas even 3-4 years before that. Now, he did help get the Colts to the Super Bowl and win Super Bowl V, but even that Johnny Unitas, if you watch him, was not the same. And when he went there, it kind of fell apart. Sam says that he can't hear me right now, so we are going to call Sam back and see if that'll work. Now you can hear the ringing
Your
too.
call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system. 908-914-1762.
All right, so we get the answer machine there. I don't know what happened with Sam. I'm trying to call him again, so I'm assuming he'll pick up because he just told me to try to call him again. But yeah, Johnny Unitas may have been the saddest of all of them, just from the fact that when you look at Johnny Unitas in a San Diego Chargers uniform, it just really doesn't look right. So that was, I think, probably the saddest ending to a quarterback's career, either him or Joe Namath. The one thing about Joe Namath, though, I think 77 opened the season up. He did have a game where he threw a couple touchdown passes against... Oh. You there, Sam?
Yep, I'm here now.
All right, keep talking. Say something again.
Did I leave you alone for a little
There
bit
you
there?
go.
No, I was just talking about...
We're fine. I was rambling on. But, yeah, so we talked about Unitas, and I still think Unitas and Namath were the two saddest ways to end a career. We're going to go back, and a guy I want to bring up because he was one of my favorites was Randall Cunningham, who I think would have been a much better quarterback if he would have been with a different coach. He was with Buddy Ryan when he was in Philadelphia, and Buddy Ryan really didn't give two craps about the offense. At the age of 34, he returned to the NFL in 1997 as a backup on the Vikings. I think it was to Brad Johnson, but I'm not sure. And by all accounts, there was nothing special about his comeback until 1998. And Cunningham and the Vikings offense, led by Chris Carter, Randy Moss, lit up the scoreboards, went 13-1 with Cunningham under center. Of course, Gary Anderson misses his only kick of the year in the NFC Championship game and robs Cunningham of a chance to possibly play in the Super Bowl. He played 3 more, average seasons with Minnesota. He backed up at Baltimore and Dallas. But his comeback that one year in 1998, I think, kind of changed the way people perceived Cunningham as a quarterback.
Yeah, because he had been trailing off even before he retired. He trailed off 1 year in Philadelphia, came back as a backup. It was to Brad Johnson. And then in the 98 season, he comes out. He's a first-team All-Pro, and he plays phenomenal. And he's on that terrific offense that almost get there. They come up 3 points short against the Atlanta Falcons in the NFC Championship game. And he led the league in passer rating that year with a 106.0. So he did terrific. He had a great year. And then he kind of fell off again, but for that one season, it looked like Randall Cunningham was back. And really, when you watch Randall Cunningham highlights and you hear the stories about Randall Cunningham, a lot of focus actually comes to that Minnesota season because that was the year where he played so phenomenal. And that's the player a lot of guys remember when they think about Randall Cunningham. They kind of gloss over the Philadelphia Eagle years and focus on that terrific season in Minnesota.
Yeah, and they should, because that year in Minnesota showed did a Philadelphia would have been so. I mean, because let's face it, they expected him to run and get half their offense with his legs. In Minnesota, when he was just expected to stand in the pocket with Brian Billick as his offensive coordinator, he was a hell of a quarterback. Now, I know he had two phenomenal talents and Hall of Fame wide receivers with him, but not everybody's going to be able to do what Cunningham did with that team that year.
When you look at it, he was getting killed in Philadelphia, too. He got sacked. He led the NFL in sacks 5 times. He got sacked 72 times in his second year in the NFL. So the Eagles were not protecting him. The Eagles were not looking out for his best interest. They weren't really trying to use him to his best quality. They just wanted to throw him out there and let him be an athlete. But they really weren't trying to help him out there. And he gets to Minnesota, and suddenly he has more protection. He only got sacked 20 times during that 98 season. So he had the protection to actually take advantage of the options they had in offense instead of getting thrown out to the wolves.
Yeah, and that Vikings team was a great team. John Randall up front on defense. They had a great offensive line, guys like Todd Stussy. So now we're going to move to Joe Montana. And Montana is a guy who it looked like his career was just going to end with injuries. Of course, Leonard Marshall in 1990 NFC Championship game hits him in the back. And I don't think he came back till towards the end of the 91 season, played a game against, I think, Detroit. They missed the playoffs but went 11-5. You get to 1993, he's aging, he's battling injuries, and he was pushed out of the way for a younger Steve Young, which in the end for the 49ers was probably the right decision. Steve Young takes him to a Super Bowl a year or two later, and Montana goes to Kansas City. Kansas City is a place that hasn't won a playoff game since 1971, I think, and had only been to the playoffs a couple times since there. He goes to Kansas City, goes 17-8, and while in Kansas City, he beats the Steelers in a wild card game in 92. In 93, I think, was the year that they upset Houston in Houston, and they play in the AFC Championship game at Buffalo. And who knows what happens. I think the Bills were a lot better team and would have won anyways. But Montana gets hurt early in that game, and Kansas City ends up losing the AFC Championship game. But Joe Montana's a guy, I think we could say, with his 17-8 record, his AFC title game berth in 93, his move was a success.
Yeah, because the Chiefs got something out of them that they hadn't gotten in years from other quarterbacks. They were a franchise that wasn't winning. And Joe Montana shows up, and suddenly they get 2 playoff wins in one season. So for them, it was a win. For him, I think it showed that he still had something left in the tank, which is what he ultimately wanted to prove. He wanted to – well, I'm sure he wanted to beat the 49ers in the Super Bowl. He probably wanted to show them that, hey, I was still the option. But, you know, he goes out there, and he shows the world that he still had the talent, he still had the arm. The issue, of course, was, like you said, the injuries still kept coming. Even when he was having success, he still dealt with injuries. He only played 11 games that 93 season, partially because of injuries. So his career was ultimately going to end because of that, but he had that final gasp where he came out and he played and he showed the world that he was still Joe Montana. Yeah,
and his last great game that I would have remembered would have been him and John Elway going at it in Monday Night Football in 1994. And I mean, they both looked like they were still in their primes for that one night. And I suggest you guys go YouTube it if nothing else. Next up, of course, Peyton Manning, who moved on from the Colts. He had the neck injury. He got the PEDs, so he could come back. And that's just a proven fact, by the way, because nobody's sending steroids to his wife. But he comes back. I don't begrudge it. I don't care. I'd have done the same thing. And Brock Osweiler wins a lot of games for that team the year they win the Super Bowl. But Manning comes in, does enough to get another Super Bowl title. And the year before that, without, the big shot from Joe Flacco in the playoffs, maybe he gets to another Super Bowl there. But I think we can say Peyton Manning's finish was a success also.
Yeah, he came into Denver, and people were wondering what we would get from Peyton Manning because of that neck injury. People really didn't know what he had left. And he came out, and he's the first team in All-Pro in 2012, so basically the best quarterback in the NFL for that one season. And then in 2013, that's the year he broke all the records with the 5,477 passing yards and 55 touchdowns. He wins the MVP again. It's his 5th of his career. They ultimately lose that Super Bowl to the Seattle Seahawks because the Seahawks had a superior defense, and they made Peyton Manning look absolutely horrible.
They made him look old.
Yeah, exactly. They made him look like he was throwing ducks out there. But then he comes out in 2014 again, and he doesn't play at the MVP level again. But Denver still goes 12-4. They still make it to the playoffs, except they just lose in the first round. But Manning, as an individual, had a lot of success there in those 3 years. And it's kind of ironic that the year they actually win the Super Bowl is the year when Peyton Manning wasn't playing like himself at all. The year Peyton Manning fell off a cliff is when that defense came together and got them that Super Bowl win.
Yeah, plus they got to play against Cam Newton. Another guy who I think was a big success, one of my favorites, Y.A. Tittle, who had a really good career for a decade with the San Francisco 49ers. At the age of 35 years old, he turned into an elite quarterback. This is the guy here that I think, he might be my number one here. He might be my number two. I'll give you my other guy, but either one of them could be. But the fact that at 35 years old, he turned into being the best quarterback possibly in the NFL. He led the Giants to a 35-1 record over the next 3 seasons, threw 86 touchdown passes in those 3 years, and that's a lot back then. And they lost the NFL title game in each of those seasons. I think the last one was in 1963 when they were beaten by the Bears, 14-10 at Wrigley Field, and that's the iconic picture of him sitting there on the ground with his head down, his helmet off, blood pouring down his face. But I think Y.A. Tittle, as an individual player, may have had more success than anybody switching teams that late in his career.
Well, Steven won the MVP in 1963, so he goes in to the Giants. I don't know what they're expecting of him. He's coming off in a season where he didn't play. He only played 4 games as a starter for the 49ers. Goes to New York, makes 3 straight Pro Bowls, throws for 3,000 yards twice. He hadn't thrown for 3,000 yards his entire career up to that point. He threw for 33 touchdowns in 62 and 36 in 63, leading the league both years. He hadn't even thrown for more than 20 touchdowns prior to that. So for him, it was incredible. For him, it was a total transformation as a player to go from a guy who was good, who was a good quarterback, but not an elite quarterback, to a guy who suddenly for 2 or 3 years was one of, if not the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
You know what I would most compare this to, even though I don't even think this guy is on Y.A. Tittle's level, would have been what happened with Rich Gannon and the Raiders.
That's right. Remember, that Super Bowl run they had, I believe.
Yeah, he was an average quarterback except for those last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, he gets to Oakland. He was in Kansas City before that, and he gets to Oakland. And for about 4 years in Oakland, he was starting to look like an elite quarterback. And then age got to him, and he kind of fell off the grid again. But for 4 years, he was making Pro Bowls. He was an MVP, I believe. Yeah, he was MVP in 2002, where he led the league in passing. He was a guy who totally changed because he hadn't thrown for 3,000 yards up to that point in his career. And then he did it for 4 years in a row with the Raiders. So on a smaller level, he did basically the same thing and changing himself basically into a top 5, top 3 quarterback in the league at the time.
All right, now another guy who I put kind of in the same vein that was even better at the end was Fran Tarkenton. And Tarkenton is different on this list because he actually started off with Minnesota. And he played there for 5 seasons. But this is when the Vikings were an infant organization. They weren't very good. He got traded to the Giants in 1967. And a lot of pressure in New York. People thought he was going to be the guy. He wasn't. He spends 5 seasons there. And he had a losing record for his NFL career. He was traded back to Minnesota in 1972. Now, this Minnesota team was a great team. They had already been in Super Bowl IV. Joe Kapp was the starting quarterback who had an MVP season that year, the only year he had an MVP season because Joe Kapp wasn't that good, but he was a tough SOB. Now, Tarkenton was probably one of the first mobile quarterbacks. The only guy I could think of really before him that ran around as much as him would have been Bobby Douglas, and that was about the same time, mid to late 60s. Douglas was with the Bears. Douglas may have been mobile just because the Bears couldn't block anybody and he had to run. But Tarkenton, over his last 7 seasons, went to 3 Super Bowls, won 64, lost 27, 2 ties, and a great mobile quarterback. And the thing about Tarkenton is this. We could sit there and say, yeah, he lost 3 Super Bowls, but he lost 3 Super Bowls to the Raiders and Stabler, Bradshaw, and the Steelers. And, the teams that they were losing the Super Bowls to were just great teams. And, of course, Bob Greasy, and the Miami Dolphins. So it's not like he took a better team to the Super Bowl and came up short and failed and played terrible. He was beaten down by three of the greatest teams that ever lived. And remember this, to get to those three Super Bowls, the Vikings usually had to beat, what was a great Rams team, a really good George Allen Redskins team, and Tom Landry's Dallas Cowboys, Sam.
Yeah, the NFC at that point, the NFC was very tough at that point, tougher than they are now. And so for him to take this team, a team that had already got rid of him once, to the big game 3 times, it was incredible for him, but obviously disappointing that they didn't end up winning one of those. But at the same time, you just got to look at it from his personal perspective, what he was able to accomplish after being jettisoned from Minnesota, coming back and really changing the narrative of his career. In New York, like you said, he didn't have a winning record. And coming back, now he's a winning quarterback. He takes them to 3 Super Bowl games, and ends up winning the MVP in 1975. So he elevated himself from being a good quarterback who couldn't win to a great quarterback who could win, but ultimately just came up a little bit short of that Super Bowl.
All right, now let's talk a little NFL news today, because I'm tired of talking about where Tom Brady's going, because I don't have a clue. But there's another quarterback here that could be added to this list if the rumors are true. The GM in Detroit says that they are not true. What do you think the chances that Matt Stafford gets traded from Dallas or from Detroit are?
I think they're very low, and I think the GM's probably telling the truth, because I tweeted about this earlier. I don't see, if you're Dallas, if you're Detroit, even if you had number 3 overall pick. Yeah, I know. If you're talking about Anthony and losing to the Jets and all that stuff, it gets stuck in my head every day.
Yeah.
But if you're Detroit, even with the number 3 overall pick in the draft, I don't know that in the draft, in free agency, or even in a trade, that you're going to get a better quarterback than Matthew Stafford.
Well,
I just don't see that happening.
And the other question,
I don't believe.
The other question is this, though. Right now, I don't think, and we saw this, when Stafford was healthy, I think the Lions were like 3-4. They'd lost a couple close games they could have easily won. This isn't a team barren of talent. Now, if you trade Matt Stafford and use a number 3 pick on a quarterback, you're not strengthening any other part of your team, and at least for that year, you've made your quarterback less. So the thing to me is, if you've got the number 3 overall pick, you could pick a guy that could really help your team, or you could trade down for multiple picks and maybe help your team even more. So trading Matt Stafford to me makes no sense.
Yeah, because it ruins your entire draft strategy. Really, it means you have to take a quarterback. So,
yeah.
And be honest, I don't think there's a quarterback in free agency who's better than Matt Stafford right now. I mean, Matt Stafford's only 32 years old. He just turned 32 6 days ago. So this is a guy who could play at a high level for another conceivably 4 to 5 years. I don't think you need to trade this guy. I don't see the benefits of trading him. There's no one out there that I say, yes, that guy is definitely better.
Now, Ian Rappaport, of course, an NFL quote-unquote insider, says that the Falcons are considering parting ways with Devontae Freeman. I mean, what do you think of that?
That's an interesting one, because Freeman's a guy who I remember he was a big part of their Super Bowl run, but hasn't really played as much of a role on the team since then. He made Pro Bowls in 2015 and 2016. He played the majority of 2017, got hurt. He was hurt basically all of 2018, and in 2019 he was really just an average running back, like a James Conner kind of guy almost in terms of production. So at this point, I wouldn't be shocked, because he's 28 years old. He's almost 28 years old. He's dealt with a lot of injuries in the past 3 years, and his production is no longer at that kind of what you consider a Pro Bowl level. He had 22 touchdowns between 2015 and 2016, had over 2,000 rushing yards, 22 rushing touchdowns, and over 1,000 receiving yards. He has not come close to that level of production in the last 3 seasons. So if you're getting rid of him, for money, I can understand it.
All right, the Cincinnati Bengals have told Andy Dalton they're going to try to put him in a situation that's not bad. So, of course, Andy Dalton will not be going to the Cleveland Browns. But when we look at this, it's $17.7 million on the salary cap by cutting ties with Dalton, whether it's by trade or outright release. My question is, can they get something in draft capital for Andy Dalton right now?
It really depends on what team they're going to. Because if a team is desperate for a quarterback, Andy Dalton can be that guy, and you can ask for a lot from teams. If like a team like the Chargers come calling, the Chargers are going to need someone, you might be able to get more from them than you would from other teams. I think you could get more maybe from the Colts. Because the Colts, you have Jacoby Brissett on that team, and I know Brissett, I don't think he's the guy going forward. You might be able to get more from them than, say, I don't think they would do this to like a Jacksonville or a Carolina who really wouldn't. I don't think they would offer up as much. I think they can get a third-round pick for Dalton, maybe a second-round pick. I don't think you're getting a first no matter what.
Yeah, I think it might be fourth or fifth round now.
Yeah, you made it known you're taking Joe Burrow. You made it known that you're getting rid of Andy Dalton, so that automatically lessens his value.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, the fact that you lessen the value, I mean, nobody was going to believe you're doing anything else, because if you don't take Joe Burrow, you're taking Tua Tagovailoa. So it's going one way or the other. It's going to be a quarterback.
Yeah, it has to be. So realistically, you have no leverage in negotiating here.
Let's just hope to God it's not Justin Herbert.
That would be a Bengals thing, though, wouldn't it?
Because I could roll with Tua. I don't mind Tua. I think Tua's a stud, too. And I'm not really sure who I think's better between Tua and Burrow yet, but I will take a closer look and figure it out. What do you think?
We're really going to have to wait.
I really like Tua.
I
really like
Burrow. I like
Tua,
too. I don't have anything against Tua, but Joe Burrow's the guy I think you can plug in and start from day one. With Tua, with his injury, we don't know exactly when he's going to be cleared to play. So in some aspects, if you're a team like the Bengals who want to pull the trigger quickly, which I think they're an organization that likes to do that, Joe Burrow, with all the numbers he put up this past year, is kind of the guy I think they're definitely going to go with.
Yeah, I think they will too. And the good thing, Sam, is we got a message from NFL Communications yesterday that we are now considered big enough to have media credentials for the NFL Combine this year.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? So that'll be interesting. I ain't going every day because it's an hour and a half away, but hopefully it'll set up so I can go on the day where the quarterbacks are there.
Hey, look at that. That'd be fun to see those guys throw. See them throw in shorts and T-shirts, and ultimately someone's going to freak out about how someone threw, but it won't really change anything.
No, not at all. Sam, you want to tell everybody where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can follow me at Sam_Teets, that's TEETS 33 on Twitter. I post plenty of sports articles and stats all the time, so feel free to go check those out.
All right, and you can follow me at Grueling Truth. You can hear us every day at 1 o'clock on the Grueling Truth Sports Network for the NFL show. But for now, for Sam Teets, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to the Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.